Welcome everyone. You're listening to the account with a news summary for day 373 of the war in Ukraine. Thank you for tuning in. Before we start today's report, I will go over a quick recap of yesterday's events. Otherwise, I grouped everything into the usual: situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments. But before we start the report, the flashpoints along the front. Kreminna. No changes to report on this front today. Serhiy Haidai, head of the Luhansk Oblast Military Administration, reported on the most difficult areas in the oblast where the fighting is taking place, and also that the Russian forces concentrated all efforts on the city of Kreminna. Bakhmut. No major changes have been reported today. As Ukraine has deployed additional units to the area to stabilize the situation, we have to wait and see if they succeeded or if Russia ran out of steam or what the actual situation is. Meanwhile, soldiers speaking without permission of a press officer told their story of the defense of Bakhmut and the difficulty they face. Their main complaint is the missing support for frontline units. Sometimes they have to wait for hours before they receive any. Furthermore, as Russia is closing in on the city, civilian casualties are on the rise. The angel of the troops, Yana Yara Rychlitska, a volunteer and paramedic with the 93rd Holotny Yar Mechanized Brigade, has been killed in Bakhmut while evacuating the wounded. And now a quick recap for day 372. The main focus of yesterday's assessment by the Institute for the Study of War was the fact that Ukrainian forces appear to set conditions for controlled fighting withdrawal from parts of Bakhmut. Ukrainian troops have destroyed 2 critical bridges in the Bakhmut area, one across the Bakhmutivka River in northeastern Bakhmut and one along the Khomove-Bakhmut route just west of Bakhmut. The UK Ministry of Defence also assessed the situation in Bakhmut, mentioning the 2 destroyed bridges and the increased pressure on Ukrainian defenders. Oleksiy Reznikov, Ukraine's defense minister, has asked the EU to provide 250,000 artillery shells a month to Ukraine. German arms concern Rheinmetall is negotiating the construction of a tank factory in Ukraine. According to Christopher Cavoli, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, more than 2,000 Russian tanks have been destroyed, and over 200,000 Russian soldiers and more than 1,800 officers have been either killed or wounded since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine last February. The Zaporizhzhia death toll of the March 4 Russian missile strike has risen to 10. Serhiy Cherevati, spokesperson for the Eastern Grouping of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, stated that Russia has not taken control of Bakhmut in Donetsk Oblast. There has been no mass withdrawal of Ukrainian troops. To start the news segment, a look at all the minor news updates out of Ukraine. Russian soldiers have posted aerial photos showing the scale of destruction in Marinka. The photos are accompanied by this message. When you hear the word apocalypse, what comes to mind? The end of the world, the end of life, something terrible and irreversible. But this is what it is now. Russia has wasted huge amounts of human resources, armaments, and materials during the war in Ukraine, and it will likely run out of offensive potential by late spring, Ukrainian military intelligence chief Kirill Budanov said. Russia's economy will not be able to further support the war of aggression in Ukraine. He also said that a decisive battle is set to take place this spring and predicted that this battle will be the final one before this war ends. So far, the war has caused about $54 billion of environmental damage to Ukraine. Furthermore, it could take up to 70 years to demine the territories. The death toll in Zaporizhzhia after the Russian missile strike has risen to 13. The Ukrainian Air Force spokesperson Yuri Inat confirmed on March 6 that Russia has used its new 1.5-ton UPAP 1500B gliding bomb for the first time. The bomb is designed to hit highly protected objects at a range of up to 40 kilometers. Enad emphasized that it was crucial that Ukraine receives the modern fighting jets, such as F-16s, to counter this threat to protect our cities and villages. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. The Energy Minister of Ukraine, Herman Halushchenko, said on March 5th that negotiations to bring the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant back under Ukrainian control reached a dead end, and situation at the plant is significantly deteriorating. According to the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, boys born in 2006 are now to be put on a military register by Russia's proxies in the occupied region of Luhansk Oblast, apparently in preparation for their mobilization in the future. Mobile networks in Mariupol were down for almost a day, Petro Andriushchenko, the advisor to the Mariupol mayor, reported. The Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Hanna Maliar, stated that Russia continues to suffer heavy losses and hospitals are full of wounded soldiers. Due to the news of the heavy losses quickly spreading among Russian soldiers, several units have started to refuse to follow orders already. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner PMC, has stated during a video address that should his soldiers pull out of the Bakhmut offensive, the entire front would collapse, which in turn will lead to the Russian command blaming him for the failure. He also said that he expects Crimea to be liberated. The former Chief of the General Staff of Great Britain, General Richard Darnat, said in an interview that he believes, in the event of a successful counteroffensive on the part of Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin will be kicked out of the Kremlin. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said that any peace talks must begin with Russian President Vladimir Putin ceasing aggression against Ukraine and withdrawing his troops. The responsibility for ending the war in Ukraine lies with Putin. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting as usual with the UK Ministry of Defense. In late February 2023, Russian mobilized reservists described being ordered to assault a Ukrainian concrete strongpoint armed with only firearms and shovels. The shovels are likely entrenching tools being employed for hand-to-hand combat. The lethality of the standard issue MPL-50 entrenching tool is particularly mythologized in Russia. Little changed since it was designed in 1869. Its continued use as a weapon highlights the brutal and low-tech fighting which has become to characterize much of the war. One of the reservists described being neither physically nor psychologically prepared for the action. Recent evidence suggests an increase in close combat in Ukraine. This is probably a result of the Russian command continuing to insist on offensive action, largely consisting of dismounted infantry, with less support from artillery fire because Russia is short of munitions. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The researchers, having closely analyzed the situation, came to the conclusion that Russian troops will not be able to encircle Bakhmut in the near future. Russian forces appear to have secured a sufficient positional advantage to conduct a turning movement against certain parts of Bakhmut, but have not yet forced Ukrainian forces to withdraw and will likely not be able to encircle the city soon. The purpose of a turning movement is to force the enemy to abandon prepared defensive positions and is different from the aim of an encirclement, which is to trap and destroy enemy forces. The analysts further assessed Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu's meeting with Eastern Military District Commander Colonel General Rustam Muradov in Western Donetsk Oblast. The goal was likely to assess the extent of Russian losses around Vuhledar and the possibility of further offensives on this front. Russian forces suffered catastrophic losses in a recent 3-week offensive near Vuhledar, and severe personnel and equipment constraints are likely preventing Russian forces from making even marginal advances on this front. The institute also reported on Russian State Duma Defense Committee head Andrei Katapalov's demand that Russian companies should buy their own air defense systems instead of relying on the Ministry of Defense resources. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The Russian Federation focuses its main efforts on conducting offensive operations in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Shahtarsk directions. The enemy continues to violate the norms of international humanitarian law, continues to strike, carry out artillery attacks on civilian objects and houses of the civilian population, and tries to destroy the critical infrastructure of our country. In the Kupiansk and Liman directions, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the area of the settlement of Bilohorivka, Luhansk Oblast. The enemy continues to advance in the direction of Bakhmut. The enemy does not stop the assaults on Bakhmut and the surrounding settlements. In the Avdiivka and Shahtarsk directions, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the direction of Krasnohorivka, Kamyanka, Severne, Popieda, and Marinka settlements of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson directions, the enemy is defending, and in some areas, the enemy is trying to create conditions for the transition to the offensive. A conflict is brewing in the top military leadership of the Russian Federation due to significant losses and the lack of real achievements at the front. In February of this year, Putin awarded the commander of the Eastern Military District, Muradov, the rank of Colonel General for a report on the successes of the 155th Marine Infantry Brigade in the Vuhledar region. Now, Shoigu demands that the general work out his rank and take the city at any cost. According to available information, the leadership of the brigade and the servicemen refuse to go on a senseless offensive again, in which the incompetent leadership sends them, to storm the well-fortified positions of the armed forces of Ukraine without any support and preparation. And that concludes today's report. As usual, you can find links to all the articles I mentioned in the description in case you want to read up on the details. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. I hope you will join me again tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.